So I cannot think of anything cringier in HR than a workplace romance gone bad. So some tips on how to handle that are coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and on the show we talk about anything related to HR. Please subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep learning from my amazing guests. So today my guest is Leah Stiegler. She's an employment lawyer from the Virginia area and a partner with Woods Rogers. Fun related fact to this episode, because I think this episode is going to be really fun. When she was in high school, she was a host and she dated a waiter. And she used her position to his advantage by giving him better tables. But it just shows you, like, it's just the start of what can go wrong with workplace romances. She also wrote an article on workplace romances that got a lot of attention, including an interview by the New York Times. So she has thought this through. Hi, Leah. How are you?
Hey, Andrea, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on. I think this is going to be hilarious.
Yeah, it'd be great to just talk about our own personal experiences. So
yes, well, that's actually where I wanted to start. I'll go first because I bet mine is not quite as salacious as you, although mine was pretty good. I had I was an HR business partner and I had a workplace romance gone bad. And I was friends with the people on Facebook. So I could see pictures of them and their families. Meanwhile, at work, I'm dealing with this workplace romance gone bad. He's stalking her and she's complaining. And it was very cringy.
What the life people live on social media is far different than the life they live outside of it. And not to mention the life they live in the workplace.
Right. Well, let that be a lesson to you. Like, seriously, they've got these ideal families on social media. And then outside of that, affairs and stalking and yuck. What about you? You've got to, as a lawyer, you've got to have some great ones. Tell me the best one that's suitable for a podcast. Any YouTube episode.
The best one that's suitable. Well, you didn't give me any parameters as to what means suitable, but as a management side employment lawyer, I've definitely had inquiries, and whether it's investigations or we're dealing with a particular termination. I mean, they could be rated anywhere from PG, where employees are sending each other cute little AIM, crush messages, to rated R, where they're having sex on conference room tables. So I think one of the ones that was the workplace romance gone bad was similar to what you said. There was an affair situation where you had a male supervisor who was married to someone outside of the workplace, and he started having an intimate relationship with one of his subordinates in a manufacturing plant. And unfortunately, the way the company found out was the supervisor's wife started calling over and over again, demanding to get contact information for his subordinate, right? I mean, clearly at some point she could pick up that, her husband was probably cheating and somehow had the idea that it was with this particular subordinate. She ended up showing up at the workplace, and the company had at that time tried to keep everything, there's no legal obligation to disclose to the spouse that her, their employee is cheating or having an affair. But she kept showing up at the workplace. They had to keep her out. They ended up sending the wife a no trespass notice. They ended up terminating him because operationally it was causing deficiencies. And sure enough, the young female subordinate ended up getting pregnant. And then they were navigating that. And despite performance issues from her and everything, it was just too touchy of a situation to ever consider terminating her, between the pregnancy protections as well as the fact that, she was in this sort of, whether it was, she was going to say it was a quid pro quo situation, but, or potentially consensual relationship with her former supervisor. So just messy all around.
So messy. And I have got to mention, in my situation, there was a restraining order.
Ooh.
I don't know how do you in the workplace when they literally, their offices are 100 feet apart? Seriously.
That's the definition of bringing your drama into the workplace. You're outside.
Oh God, just don't do it. Don't do it. Okay. So we could talk about the messy part for such a long time. We need to talk about what we're going to do about it. What do you think workplaces are getting wrong in HR in particular when it comes to workplace romances generally, and what should we do about it?
They're too focused on trying to prevent them. That's gonna.
Oh.
I don't know if I'm going on a ledge here, and you're gonna lose your followers by me saying this, but I did see a Forbes article from April of 2024 that said 60% of of adults reported being in a workplace romance at some point in their careers, and 43% of those actually resulted in marriage. So
Mhm.
to me, that seems like you've got a good shot at finding your lifelong partner at work, right? So I'm not preaching that you should go and drop your delete your Tinder and Hinge and just focus on your Outlook as your dating pool. But what I am preaching is I think companies should stop focus on trying to prevent workplace romances and you know spending resources on potentially losing good employees, like having automatic zero tolerance policies for workplace romances, and refocus those resources on navigating workplace romances.
So I hope that many workplace romances are actually totally above board. But for those ones that are not, like affairs, like, the supervisor's employee relationships, what policy should we have to help manage those? And when you think about like those relationships, affairs and supervisors and employees, it's not like they're going to go out and tell us all about it. Those are the ones that are really going to be underground, and they're going to try and keep it a secret. Like, is policy really going to help?
Oh yeah, that's hard, right? Because my first recommendation is you want to have there are a couple of policies you want to consider. One is a disclosure policy, right? That employees
Mm.
have to disclose that they're in relationships, because this is going to allow you to implement policy number 2, which is how do we navigate it? How can we assess whether this relationship, whether there are any sort of perceived or actual conflicts of interest, such as a subordinate dating a supervisor, or someone in human resources dating an employee. They might have access to their personnel information, and so I think the disclosure is step number 1. But to your point, I think that employees rarely do. One of my really good friends, I'm not going to say her name or throw her under the bus, she's one of my best friends though, and she and her spouse met at work, and actually that another employee had reported to HR that she thought that these two employees were dating, and they were kind of my friend. It was I'm sorry, the supervisor of her spouse at the time. And so this person reported favoritism. Basically, that they were saying this isn't fair that he's getting all this favorable treatment. Kind of like me in my situation with the waiter, where I was giving him the better high tops with the good tips when I was the host. And HR actually started monitoring their AIM chats because, as we all know, the company is the owner of all that electronic communication. And those AIM chats, did they get sexy, Andrea. So she got pretty much a final warning, slap on the wrist. And the HR had called her in and asked her to disclose, basically said, "Are you in a relationship?" She froze there, was like, "No, no, not at all. We're just friends." And they put the AIM chats in front of her, and she was like, "Okay, yes, yes, we are. We are." And so they ended up, instead of losing two good employees from a performance standpoint, they ended up rearranging their relationship, putting him in a different department. And she ended up with a final warning. And so, I mean, that's kind of step number 2, right? I think the company responded appropriately in that situation, where, in addition to disclosure, have a process for how you respond when someone does disclose, or when you are aware that they're in a relationship. And that is sort of looking at conflicts of interest. And the other one is implementing a love contract. Have you heard of that, Andrea?
I sure have not heard of that. Sure, yeah, yeah, no. I have
Yeah.
never heard of a love contract, which is
Yeah.
what got me interested in this conversation at all, although the whole topic is kind of funny.
Right, right. I mean,
So tell me about love contracts.
so this is something that a company can put in place, and it's not a lovely "I love you forever and you love me forever and we're happy and I do whatever." It is really just a disclaimer. It's basically a document that you would bring each employee in individually as an HR professional, and you would say, "Look, we are aware you're in a relationship. and we need you to sign this document saying that this is a consensual relationship. And in that document, you also have in there your sexual harassment reporting procedure. You explain that the employee needs to disclose if anything changes, their circumstances of their relationship change, and that you as the company always retain the right to either terminate one or the other or both, or to rearrange their reporting relationship or their working relationship due to the nature of their workplace relationship or for any other reason, right? And so you are protecting yourself as a company. And the reason you do this is because while we may see statistics where 43% of the 60% of people that get into a workplace romance get married, you've got to think of the number of people that are in a workplace that break up or get divorced. And so when things go south, we tend to see in the legal world a lot of sexual harassment claims, whether
Yes.
employees, right? Yeah. Who wouldn't, right? When you're in a relationship and someone breaks up with you, you keep pursuing them. Now we've got a non-consensual situation. So you want to protect yourself as a company so that you can say, no, this was consensual, and they knew that they could report sexual harassment. So they can't recharacterize what was happening in the workplace against the company and say the company was on notice that there was harassment happening.
Okay, so next question. Like, do you really need a policy to deal with a situation when you find out that a leader and their subordinate, like, isn't that just like accepted as a no-no and a conflict of interest in the supervisor relationship?
I would say my personal opinion would be, yeah, right. There's a poor judgment thing happening right there. And as a company, you're looking at that leader saying, this person just doesn't have good judgment to be a leader, right? If you
There sure is.
Exactly. So I think you're exactly right. Those are the kind of the easy examples. I do run into a lot of situations where I'm working with clients and we're talking through these situations, and that supervisor or that leader may be one of the best performers of the company. And they do not want to lose that person due to profit, due to PR reasons. And so they do try to, okay, let's navigate this. How do we do this? But if it's so messy that person has engaged in, let's say, an affair, or their subordinates start other subordinates start learning about it and thinking, well, I just can't trust this supervisor anymore, there's favoritism, and then they're looking at the company itself and saying, wow, company, you didn't do anything about this situation, and I just don't trust that the company has good judgment here, right? So I think there are a lot of things, both legal and non-legal, that a company has to consider.
So, now we need to give those people out there because, like my situation, we had no workplace romance policy. So most workplaces, I would dare say, don't. So what advice do you have for an HR person out there who's trying to deal with a workplace romance gone bad?
The policies make your life easy because it's easy to point to an employee to a policy when you're talking to an employee and say, hey, you didn't disclose this, and by mere nature of that, that's a termination, rises to level of termination or something like that. But there is nothing preventing a company from addressing a workplace romance even without some sort of written or unwritten policy. And I think you're exactly right. I don't think a lot of companies put something like this in an employee handbook. And so, because they just don't expect that it's going to happen, maybe. And so that, I think at the time, though, I think you still need to kind of decide how you're going to address it. And I think the same rules come into play, right? You're looking at, is there a conflict of interest? Do you have, has this person abused their position by using this relationship? Do we have any sexual harassment concerns? What are our optics concerns from a PR standpoint or a media standpoint? And it is from a judgment call place, can we operate without this person or both of these people? And you do need to be careful as a company when you are responding to a workplace romance. If you're going to discipline an employee or terminate an employee, then you need to consider whether you do it to both employees. I did have a case one time where two employees they were in a workplace romance. They ended up standing outside the workplace one day in the parking lot after hours, clocked out, right? So not on working time, but they got into an altercation where she was screaming and yelling at him, and she kind of shoved him, and then he pushed her up against the car, and this was caught on camera. And the company at the time, they needed people in his role. I believe he was like an operator or something, and they didn't need as many people in her role. And so they ended up terminating her. And then she sued and claimed this was sex discrimination, that you held us we both engaged in the same misconduct, and you held the female to a different standard than the male. Now, their real reasons were operational. We didn't need her as much as we needed him. But, from her perception, this was gender. The only distinction here was their genders. And so we ended up settling that case because of that risk, that we didn't really have much in the way to rely on. So I think a company has to decide carefully how they are going to respond. And you can look at something like the fact that someone may be in a supervisory position and held them to a higher standard than someone who's the subordinate as well.
Yes, yes. Like supervisors do and should be held to a higher standard because they are the ones, providing oversight on this stuff, and they're supposed to be leading by example, at least to some extent.
Right. Yeah. With great power comes great responsibility. So.
Yeah, right.
It's a Spider-Man quote for anyone who likes superhero movies.
Oh, yeah, you know what? It's shocking how often that quote comes up. Yeah, it does. Okay. So I have a number of questions I want to ask you, and I'm hoping, because there's so much ground to cover here. So I'm hoping you can answer these questions in like under a minute. You talk pretty fast, so I think this is possible. Okay. So first question, love contracts sounds super weird and awkward. So how do you actually present a love contract to employees who are in a relationship, keeping it as unweird as possible?
Yeah, well, I would just simply state, to remain in working at this company, you, as a condition of employment, you need to agree and disclose that you're in this workplace relationship and that it is consensual. I have had clients who've tried to have this conversation, and one employee says, "Okay, yes, we're in a relationship," and the other employee says, "No, we're not in a relationship. We're just talking. It's a situationship." So it's hard for Gen Z to really define when they're in a relationship, maybe. So you might run into that, but the company has their facts, and they're executing that document for a reason and putting it forward for a reason. And so if an employee refuses to sign it, I say then that employee is not willing to work there for you.
So I think that workplace policies around workplace romance are very unusual. I've never worked for someone or even consulted to anyone who had one. How common are these?
So I would say you're probably right. I think many companies don't have anything particularly in writing. Companies who I've seen everything from a no PDA policy, so we don't really care if you're in a relationship, but no kissing on the manufacturing floor, all the way to an actual, workplace, close relationships policy, which is a really touchy way of saying if you're in any sort of close relationship, whether it's a sibling relationship, a dating relationship, a roommate relationship, that you have to disclose that. And we as the company get to decide whether the two of you can stay in those positions despite having that close relationship. So you can really fall anywhere on the spectrum as a company.
I kind of like that close relationship policy, at least for larger employers where this, the chances of this happening are not low. Okay, so the end of most relationships is full of all kinds of awkwardness and tension. And
Sounds like you're speaking from experience, huh?
well, I'm speaking from, ending relationships experience, but I don't, and then I did live in a small town, so I suppose I did date people at work. But in many cases, it's also like one person's ready to end it and the other person is not. So when a relationship is ending and it's awkward and it's uncomfortable for both parties, what's the difference between that awkwardness and harassment? When does it cross the line?
Sure. Okay. The harassment comes into play when someone is experiencing unwelcome and offensive sex-based conduct in the workplace. And, whether it's sort of really severe, something like someone, let's say, exposing themselves in the workplace, to something pervasive, like consistent text messages or comments, date, let's go out again, give me one more chance, right? That's probably what you'd see more often, is that, sort of subtle pervasiveness. But once it becomes unwelcome, that's when a company has an issue. And there was a case that came out a few years ago in one of the federal courts here, where there were two doctors or physicians at a hospital, and they had actually gone through a divorce. They were still working there. And the ex-husband, kept approaching his ex-wife and, trying to, see if they could get back together. He confided in her because, that was his ex-wife. And she ended up suing, saying that he sexually harassed her, and suing the hospital for not keeping him away from her, because she had brought it up numerous times. And one of the allegations was that he actually had walked into her office and exposed himself and asked her to look at his genitalia, because he thought he had a mark on his genitalia, like, or some sort of like mole or something. And he was saying, oh well, she was my ex-wife, so we've been intimate before, so it's not a big deal. And she was saying, no, he's a coworker at this point, and that's pure sexual harassment. No coworker should be have to be exposed to another coworker's genitalia. So you will have employees who just are ignorant and don't know really that something like that is inappropriate, and then it does fall on the company for not responding.
That example, though, like, a text, they're using their personal phones. Maybe the texts aren't being sent during work hours, but are being read during work hours. Maybe they're on different shifts like doctors would be. Is that an obligation for employers to manage when all of this is happening in their personal lives and on their personal devices?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, I would tell an employer yes. You would make the argument that no, we shouldn't have to deal with that when it's outside the workplace. This is personal drama. But the minute that it starts impacting an employee's terms and conditions of their employment, and that's sort of one of the legal elements of harassment, is does it impact the terms and conditions of employment? Then yes, an employer is obligated to respond. And in the US, an employer has to take what's called prompt and effective remedial action, meaning whether you suspend someone, you investigate, and you remedy it in terms of separating employees, disciplining employees, or terminating someone. You have to take some sort of step. Now, I always say to clients, like, imagine if you had two coworkers who were exchanging racial epithets outside of the workplace, and then they come back into the workplace. You as a company would still not want that employee who's using derogatory language back in your workplace. So it is still something that you should respond to. If you are aware of and you have knowledge that someone is sexually harassing somebody even outside of the workplace, like you said in that stalker example, then you're almost negligent to not address it as a company.
I have an example like that. There was one time when I was stalked and it was outside of work, same small town. But
I hope you're out of that small town.
yeah, yeah. It was a great small town, actually, but he did a little bit of it did happen at work, and man, they came down hard on him. Anyway, what happens when workplace involves the C-suite?
Ooh, that's a good one, because I mean, I would say you want to hold true to your policies as well, but like we were talking about earlier, some of those C-suite people are hard to get in the door with that level of experience. They might have been co-founders of the company. They might be leading multi-million-dollar initiatives, and to lose them would be a huge operational detriment. But I do think you have to look at your C-suite people as the people who have to set the example for the company. And if your C-suite is not compliant with policies or executing good judgment, then that is going to paint a picture for the rest of your workplace, and you're going to have a culture problem. If they think, oh, the rest of us aren't allowed to kiss on the manufacturing floor, but it's okay for our C-suite executive to have an affair and sleep with their assistant, you're going to have a major culture problem and a trust and respect problem as a company in that workplace. And then finally, you've got to think about the PR aspect. So a lot of times, we had a situation where the CEO of a company was actually caught on video with a prostitute. And yes, huge company. And it went on not just the local news, but the national news. And you're thinking, wow, this is a PR nightmare. And you can believe we were on the phone with a lot of crisis response entities and marketing agencies trying to come up with some sort of plan to remedy the company's reputation. So you do have to take precautions as a company when you have C-suite executives involved in workplace romances.
Yeah. Okay, I gotta ask, what happened to that CEO?
Well, I'm sworn by attorney-client privilege, but we ended up parting ways for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Final question. Where can someone find you and find out more about love contracts, actually?
Yeah, LinkedIn for sure. Leah Stiegler, Stiegler. You can follow me there. We also, I do have a short little video series called "What's the T in L&E?" That's labor and employment. And every 2 weeks, my colleagues and I release a short, sort of 2 to 4 minute video about a different employment law or HR topic. And so you can find us on YouTube. That's "What's the T in L&E?" And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks, Leah. I love that. That was as hilarious as I was expecting to be, but also useful, because I will think about love contracts the next time something like this comes up for a client I'm working with. I have done a number of investigation-related episodes, and a link to one is there and one is there. Thanks for watching out there, and we will see you next time.